Welcome back to Middle Fingers Up. I'm your host, Kieran. Today we are holding space for a story that too often gets untold, especially in our South Asian communities. Ovarian cancer is rarely talked about, yet it affects so many people. The pressure to be well, do well, live well, but all of that in silence can be quite suffocating. But also, silence doesn't mean peace. Our guest today is a South Asian woman, a mother, a wife, and a cancer survivor. But that's just the beginning. She's also a change advisor and coach, a keynote speaker, AI innovator, an engineer, and she's really, really motivated to transform healthcare through systems where there's more thinking, there's more space for advocacy. And she's also the co-host of a group called Jai and Hope. It's a support group for those impacted by cancer, alongside her co-host Harjeet, who joined us here not too long ago to share her own cancer story. So today we have Alvina Nadeem. She is not just here to share what happened, but she's here to share what she knows and hopefully help break some silences in our homes where we feel the pressure to keep it in and stay in that sort of stoic mode where we deal with things like facing death on our own. I think that when I met Alvina in our consult, I really appreciated that she shared that when we talk about these things out loud, we're also giving others permission to do the same. And that's really why she's here today, is to give permission, if needed, to get out there and talk more about cancer and how it impacts not just the person that's experiencing it, but as a collective community, those around. So Alvina, welcome to Middle Fingers Up. I'm so honored you're here today. You carry so many roles. You're a woman, you're a mom, you're a wife, you're a survivor, you're an engineer. And today we get to sit with all of that. Thank you for trusting MFU with your story. So how are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk and share more. And hopefully, like you said, be maybe the catalyst for someone else who is maybe looking for external permission, but making them realize, like, no, you have to give yourself permission. And so maybe I could be that catalyst.
Yes, for sure. So maybe let's start with you, your story, your body, your voice. And, I was writing the question of let's start at the beginning. When did you first feel like something was off? And then I thought, no, that's not the beginning. And I bet this happens a lot, is you get diagnosed with cancer and somehow those around you kind of make it your identity, and that's who you are. You're this cancer survivor, but you're not just a cancer survivor. That's a hat you get to wear. And so I'd like to back it up a bit and learn a little bit about little Alvina, how you grew up. You didn't grow up in Canada, and we're talking about silence, breaking the stigma. I'd love to hear what your household was like growing up, what the community was like when it comes to talking about those things those taboos that we hold so dear to our heart, but don't speak out loud of. Curious what that was like for you growing up, if that was honored, supported, not. So tell us what little Alvina was like growing up.
Thanks for recognizing that. I really appreciate it, because it's true that once you go through something like cancer, it just kind of, you become this monolith for most people. So it's like, hey, I'm all of me, all of that is still part of me. And it informs the identity that's shaped. Yes, there is a cancer journey in there, but there's other things too. So right now I'm 38. So I actually was, I think, 7 years old when we moved from Pakistan to Canada with my little sister and my parents. So I'm, the older child, and I really got to see my parents go through the whole process of having these big dreams and then things not working out exactly the way they wanted. I still think that, they did well, but they had their own ideals. And so, two professionals coming to the West, the golden paved roads. And so it didn't pan out the way they wanted. So that, I think, was probably the start of me developing this need to perform and to do well and to almost like be the thing that makes them happy, because the thing that they needed wasn't happening. So it was like, oh, well, I want to give them that thing that says, hey, we didn't fail and look, our kids are doing well. So I just really took that on me as a kid. And I guess being the older child too, I just felt it even harder, So yeah, that kind of, I feel like, developed this sense of grit, maybe is the word, and like getting through the hard parts. And it was maybe survival mode, really. So perhaps I've had experience with survival mode that like served me in more recent times with the cancer journey. So yeah, and then afterwards, I moved to the States because my dad got a job in the States, so we moved there. I went to high school there, and then I ended up moving back to Montreal. And then I got married, and I had my kids. And then 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, which that whole process of even getting diagnosis is like very different from how most people get their diagnosis, but we'll get into that when we get there.
So immigrating to Canada, you say a lot when you talk about being the oldest daughter and then taking on those pressures, that guilt. You're watching your parents come from a whole different world to a new world. You're doing the same thing, and this like sense of pride and appreciation, which a lot of us grow up with in the community, wanting to show our parents it was worth the survival and everything that they did for us. When you and I met for the consult, you shared a phrase, which was, I'm going to show them. And it's kind of like your little mantra. You said you sort of even used it throughout your treatment and your process as you were diagnosed with cancer. Did some of that come from, like, when I think of you sharing your story, I think did it come from there? You arrive here and you see all the hard work your parents are putting forth. Maybe it's not what you guys thought it was going to be. Where did that phrase truly originate from, that I'm going to show them?
That's like the seed, like what we just talked about, how immigrating here and seeing that struggle and that desire to show them. At first it was like, oh, I want to show them, but in a positive way. But then it also then served, like when I was getting negative pushback from things, like, so I'll give you a real example. So like being in school and experiencing racism for the first time, like being on the bus and little kids who, by the way, weren't necessarily white kids. It was a very mixed neighborhood, but they were lighter skin tones. And so, but they were from different countries. And I remember clearly, and it's so crazy how some of this gets seared in our memories. I remember being on the bus, and for the first time, someone like took their finger, put it on their forehead and said, "Oh, Paki, Paki, Paki." And I was like, I don't understand, because as a kid, like being a Pakistani, I was like, why is that an insult? Like where I literally came from. And also it didn't make sense because they were obviously referencing to, like the bindi. And so I was like, it's not even the right religious. Like,
yeah, right.
So I was like,
I know.
It was like, how would they like do that? And I was just like, and it was the first time I was like, what is this? Because, when you come from a country, especially as a child, where everyone's like this homogenous kind of population, everyone looks like you don't see that you're different. And then you come somewhere where people are like, no, you are different. And you've never seen yourself like as different. And so I think those like layers of adversity, or whatever you want to call it, I think reinforce that feeling of, I'm going to show them, right? So whether it was in school, whether it was then later on in life when I wanted to become a mechanical engineer, which by the way comes from a dream of wanting to be an astronaut. So, and so I remember talking to like this an older person, like a much older uncle, who was like, oh, what are you planning to study? I was like 16 at that time. I was like, oh, I want to be a mechanical engineer because I like love space and I want to get into aeronautical and things like that. And he was like, oh, but that's for boys, or you're such a pretty girl. Like, it's like, you're too pretty for this. It was almost like what? What kind of like, and I remember like my dad after that family event, he took me aside, or maybe on the way home or something. He was like, listen, you don't listen to that. Like, you do the things you want to do. You're smart, you're this, you're that. And so I'm so grateful that they didn't force me into some gender identity stuff that we often see in our culture of like, no, you belong in the kitchen or whatever, that type of stuff. Again, it was like, okay, I'm going to show them that like, it doesn't matter that I'm a girl or that you think I'm too pretty for this, whatever that means.
Yeah.
So it's just kept getting reinforced. And then even when I was in school, when I was at McGill studying engineering, I also constantly felt like that, I was one of the few girls. There were 5 girls, I think, in like 85, a class of 85. So like, you're just always doing the thing that other people aren't. And so you're constantly in that, I guess you're facing adversity all the time. And so it reinforced the whole I'll show them. And I think what's cool in my story is that the I'll show them often was successful. Mm-hmm. So it showed me that by having this attitude, I do make it through the storm. And it just became something that I got used to. And I started to, I guess, become confident in that feeling of, oh, I can get through this if I just keep going, and if I just keep doing more and whatever. But it's also exhausting. Yeah. So there's like 2 sides to that.
Yeah.
Because how much work do you have to put in more than maybe someone who doesn't look like you or sound like you or whatever. So there's a lot there to look at, I guess, and think about.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And I so much sits with me, so much resonates with me. I'm sure people listening, watching today, women, South Asian women of color, like, yeah. Absolutely. It is on one hand helpful to sort of have this, I'm not going to give up. But it, like you said, it is exhausting because at what point do they show us? It's like always I'm showing them and they can also show us too, but we don't live in that world. And you find the lessons along the way that shape you. And, you're sitting here today saying overall, it helped me get through something so big like cancer as well. So maybe we can shift gears and talk a little bit about ovarian cancer. For you, when did you first feel something was off? Like how did you come to learn of this diagnosis?
So it's really interesting because now, like when I talk about this, like in hindsight, I see that I did have symptoms way before around the time I was getting diagnosed, but I would have never thought that was related. So I would say maybe in like the summer of 2022, I'm just looking at the year, like, yeah, it was 2022. So summer of 2022 is when I started to feel like just indigestion type issues. Like it felt like I would be eating and then out of nowhere get like this really like stabbing type of pain in my like stomach, as if like it really felt like someone took a knife and was just like, skewering it in there. And so I thought that maybe I was experiencing like, I don't know, I'm intolerant to lactose, like most brown people, So I was like, maybe I had something with dairy or something. And I just kept thinking I did something wrong, like, or maybe at that time I had some weird sensitivity to like raw carrot protein. Like I couldn't eat raw carrots. I was, maybe I ate a salad with like carrot in there. And I just kept thinking maybe I did something, right? So, and then I noticed that was happening like almost like every few months, like every 2 months, I would have this weird stabbing pain, and it was getting worse. So at first it was just in the gut, and then it was like the whole like gastric system was just like flaring up, and it was just like really, really painful. And then so eventually I did decide to go get checked, and they're like, yeah, it looks like gastritis, which actually just means like your gastric system is inflamed. So is it because of an infection? Is it because of a virus? Is it something else going on? You don't know. So they were just treating obviously the symptom. And, at that time I was like 35, I guess. Yeah, I was 35. And so, nobody thinks cancer of a 35-year-old who looks fine and healthy. And so I was being treated for just like an inflamed gastric system, basically. And that wasn't really helping, but it was just so hard to understand. It was just so random. And then eventually it kind of cooled off. And looking back, it wasn't that it was cooling off, it was cyclical. It was on that downside of the cooler, calmer side of that cycle that I was like, oh, okay, I guess it's over. And then in mid-February is when I started to have really sharp pain. So now we're in February 2023, and it was like, imagine menstrual cramps, but like worse. So just really, really bad cramping. And at that point, I was like, that's weird, because I didn't really get cramps. I wasn't someone that got cramps, or, I mean, when I did, it was when I was really young. And so for, I don't know, more than a decade, I hadn't had such severe cramps. So I was like, that's weird, but maybe it's an infection. I don't know. But a little red flag did go up at that point. And then not long after, maybe like a week after, I started to feel like a bit more dizzy and like just random like bouts of fatigue. I was having a hard time. I kept getting migraines. I wasn't someone that would get migraines like that. And then I think the biggest red flag, the thing that made me go get checked, was that I started to, what I thought was have a period, but like 10 days ahead, and which made no sense because I was just very, very regular. It was like 28 days. I literally knew like what the moon looked like because this 28-day cycle. I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to get my period, And I was like, that's so weird. Like not a day or two, like 10 days before actually getting the period. And it didn't look right. It looked weird. And so I think that was when I really started to think like there's something going on. I should take this seriously. So I'm going to pause here for a second, because what I haven't told you here is probably around this time actually is I started to use ChatGPT. So I was working in a tech kind of space where we would help other companies kind of innovate or whatever. So I was used to tech. So I was used to using ChatGPT. It was like this new thing back in 2022. It came out and everybody was like downloading it. So naturally I was playing with it for work. And so when I started to have these symptoms, I was like, you know what? Instead of Googling it, I'm going to be curious and check what ChatGPT would say. And I was very like crafty with it. Like I wasn't saying it's me. I was like, oh, imagine I am a, med student and I'm studying a case of a female this age, blah, blah, blah. I was just like literally like creating like
your own
like
case study.
Yeah. And I was like, what would be, what are some possible underlying causes? And at first it wasn't like alarming at all. It didn't scare me or anything. But eventually, the more my symptoms progressed, it was able to keep track of that because I was continuing it in the same chat. And eventually it did say cancer twice. I actually went back and looked at my notes. It did mention cancer. So it mentioned three things. It was like, it could be IBS, it could be pelvic inflammatory disease, or it could be ovarian cancer. And I was looking at the way I was responding. I was like, okay, rule out cancer now. And I was like, because I wasn't looking for cancer. I was like, no, it's probably not cancer. Like, what's the other stuff?
Right.
But just looking back, I was like, oh my gosh, I actually said it 2 or 3 times. And I was just like, no. But it was right. Like it was able to connect the dots and see the bigger picture that I wasn't seeing.
Wow. It's interesting that you went to tech for this, and this is today, fast forward to today, a few years later, it's people are doing funny videos of AI, ChatGPT being their bestie all day, every day, their therapist, all these things. And there's a lot of controversy out there because it is AI, it is a tool, and some people are using it more, accessing it more than just a tool. But really, at the end of the day, I'm not here to argue a controversy or not. I think what's really interesting about this is that you were able to use a tool that gave you a bit of a head start, because when we look at the numbers for ovarian cancer, like the tiny little bit of research that I did, and I know you can say a lot more to this, is that like, they say over 3,000 women a year in Canada in particular get diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and almost 2,000 of those women die because it's diagnosed so late in the game. As you shared your symptoms, many women listening today or viewing today would be like, oh yeah, I have these kind of gastric symptoms all the time. Like you said, you're lactose intolerant, IBS, all these kinds of things that have been in a lot of our dietary issues for South Asians. And so here we are in a world where we're kind of lucky with the way healthcare works in Canada. We don't have to pay for it. Sometimes we get lucky, good doctors, all these kinds of things if we fight hard enough. But a lot of people don't know how to advocate. A lot of people don't know where to start. And even for you, when it mentioned cancer, like we don't go, very few people go to the worst case scenario, or even want to acknowledge that, right? And on a side note, there's so many intersectionalities here. Cancer is a taboo. So nobody wants to even say those words because you say them and all of a sudden you're going to get it. It's like so contagious as we're so fearful. You're a tech person too. Like what do you think about this controversy of using AI and for you, how did that help out and where what do we need to rule out? What do we need to be mindful of? And where should we be utilizing such a resource too to help us? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh, I have so many opinions. Which is because I have and in my case, it's like, it's not just opinions, it's like proof. Because I literally got a stage 1 diagnosis at 36. And just to, as a intro to this conversation, I think it's important to dig just a little bit deeper, if that's okay, into the ovarian cancer symptoms and the median age and all that. So the median age of ovarian cancer is women usually over 55, 60. So that's the range. Okay. Secondly, most of those women, like you said, and that number that most women is around 85%. That's huge. 85% of cases are diagnosed in more advanced stages. Only 15%. That's insane. 15% only get usually a stage 1 diagnosis. So if you take that math and you say, usually it's older women and usually it's at later stages, what was the chance that a healthy looking, appearing 36-year-old mom who did all the quote unquote right things in life, health wise, would be diagnosed with a stage 1 diagnosis of ovarian cancer? I'm not someone that someone looks at and goes, oh, it's probably ovarian cancer. No one will say that. I was 36. Maybe if I was 63 then, but I was 36, And so I feel like I'm that case in point type of, if you want to look at me as a data point of saying oh, this is a person whose trajectory probably drastically changed in terms of getting a diagnosis. And I think one of the things with AI is that we often talk about, well, there's a few things, and I want to acknowledge it, of course it can be a dangerous thing, but so can a hammer. A hammer is a tool. It has potential to harm, has potential to do good. You can build with it, or you can hit someone on the head and it becomes a murder weapon, right? And it's the same thing with AI in the sense that it depends on how you use it and if you know how to use it. And so, it needs to come with guardrails for sure. It needs to come with some level of comfort and knowing what are the right prompts you should be giving it. Kind of what I explained, if I had said, I have this, it wouldn't have answered the way that I would need it to answer, because it would kind of shut down and be no, I'm not a doctor, right? So I had to kind of prompt it the right way and present it as this hypothetical thing. And by the way, this was back in 2020, early 2023. So at that time, it was a closed database, right? They only updated every so many months. So it wasn't online. So it was very restricted, and it was very, very cautious in what it said. So I really had to be sneaky in the way I was prompting it, which could be a good thing because that means there were some guardrails, right? The other thing is there's this conversation around bias, and I acknowledge that there is bias baked into AI, but that bias is coming from the stuff that it has fed on, which is things that people have written, right? So I feel like it actually is showing us that bias exists collectively in our society, And it's also trickling down into the people we're actually, the humans we're training. So like the doctors that are being trained on that same system of body of knowledge also have that bias ingrained into them when they are, in front of a real human being. So that can be argued as well.
So what I hear you saying, what comes out to me right away with that bias, because that's a really good point, is a doctor may have the same bias towards me as AI. My reason why I hate it is like it's a bunch of white people creating a new world that all of us people of color live in the real world here. And then you go to this AI world, and again, it's the same thing. There's really no space, no people of color at the top putting in stats, information, studies, all that. So we go and type in these things, and it's not really considering what my race really would be, what my dietary needs would be. But then when you put it in the way you do, a doctor does the same thing too. They're medically trained by whatever studies of white doctor in the 50s put together, and very few are pushing, and only now are we getting so few, but like women doctors or doctors of color that are doing studies are trying to get money and grants and whatnot to help push the system. So I appreciate that. Thank you for saying, well, there's lots of these biases and intersectionalities that your own human doctor would likely carry with them too when you walk into, like an overweight person is treated as just an overweight person, not that there are other health risks, and AI might do the same. So I'm just like having a real life aha moment right now. And this is why I'm sharing this, because I've never really, I've been so anti it, to be honest, that I've never really opened the door to think of it in that way too.
Yeah. And that was like, you actually walked in right into the next point that I wanted to make was, so the other thing is that AI doesn't see me until I let it see me. So what I mean is, if I go to AI and I say, I'm a female, I'm 36, it's looking at that broad, like, okay, she's a female 36. And then if I say, I have 2 kids and I've, have breastfed or whatever, I'm giving it now data to work with. And me telling it, I am this and I'm that and I'm South Asian and here's my whole medical history, like that, it doesn't have access to that until I give it, right? Whereas my doctor, when I walk in, depending on what I'm wearing, how they're feeling, what I look like, my skin tone, my height, my weight, all of these are data, that will then inform the way they will provide you with their service. So even if they're not supposed to, being human comes with the fact that we have, unconscious biases, and to the point where, I'm married to a French Canadian, a white person, right? So I see the difference that I'm spoken to when I walk into a doctor's appointment, when he's with me and when he's not. And he's kind of been like my filter, I guess, because like when I'm worried about something, like, you have to come with me. He's like, no. I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's different, because he has never witnessed it. Because when he's there, it doesn't happen as much, at least,
I do know, because I'm also married to a white man. So I 100% know what you're talking about. It's like sometimes sickening to admit, but it's like the world we live in, they're like our shield, the tool we bring to be seen as an equal or something like that. So I hear you absolutely when you say that, and they won't get it because they don't. I mean, they're a man, but then also they're a white man, so they have like these different privileges too. That we're like, okay, I want to reap those benefits too, right? Like your priv. So I get why, as a strategy, you would have him in the room, and it's sad, but that is the truth of the world you live in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, some of those moments where you're like, oh, God forbid I actually look sick when I walk into a doctor's office and I'm alone. Like, it's like, I literally, like, if I know that I won't be able to go to an appointment with my husband and I have to go alone, I actually dress up, because I'm like, if I don't dress up, I'm going to be categorized as like, oh, this is a uneducated immigrant coming from like, no, I don't know, like,
Who knows, like the friggin' sewers or where
like it's just
where that clown guy lives down below. Like
yeah, it's like the image of like
the troll under the bridge. Like I know we laugh and we joke and what, but that and some people today are like listening, thinking, oh, that's not how it is, or really, and it's like, yeah, that's the problem. Is like it's still seen as that can't be the way it is, but that is the way it is, and you firsthand are experiencing it, so that has to be the way it is. And it's so hard for people to accept that because that's not the world they live in. And I think this is such an important thing to share here, because a lot of our people don't go to the doctor because of this treatment of it's worse if I go there, I'm going to get less than not. And so part of why we're sharing this is why it's so important to keep pushing and talking about these things, because we need treatment too. And if you didn't go do these things, you wouldn't be here to share your story, unfortunately. So you're talking about advocating, right? So every brown woman can't marry a white man as their strategy.
And I felt that like how tying this back to the AI thing is that, well, AI is, it doesn't come in to the office, quote unquote, while being stuck in traffic and had a bad day and fought with his wife or her children, and doesn't have, it's not coming in with that layer of the things people go through then affect the service that it's providing. And it's not judging me because I haven't told it, I haven't given it information to judge me on. It's actually very interesting because it actually responds very well when you put it in its place, which I don't think you could do that with a doc and be like, hey, I think you have bias right here. I think you need to reevaluate what you're saying. Like, whereas I can do that with AI and be like, oh, I think that sounds a bit biased. Like, please consider this community. Or like, I've had conversations with AI, especially now that I'm like way more like used to it, where I'll really like create a conversation where I actually want it to be specific to me. And I'll actually ask it to only consider this data set or that data set and like make it specific and customized to, let's say the South Asian population, and not look at the broad data set, and you'll see how like it actually adapts. And so you're like almost creating your own customized healthcare navigator or whatever you're doing,
Right.
So that's what, comes back to like knowing how to use it, knowing how to prompt it, and not accepting the first answer as the right answer, and recognizing that you learn how to use it and it learns how to respond to you. And so this kind of like this relationship you're building almost with your AI tool. So all that to say, what it essentially allowed me to do, I mean, the dots were all there. It just helped me connect them and then present them to my doctor, who, by the way, she's awesome. Okay. But she was like astonished. She was like, I don't know how you, like what it was that made you come see us, because most people at this stage don't recognize these as actual symptoms and they don't come. So she was like, how did you know to come? Like, these are such vague symptoms. And at that time, I think I didn't feel comfortable sharing that I was using AI because it's so new. I was like, I'm going to get judged like crazy. So I was like, yeah, I just listened to my inner voice, But in a way I did, right? Like there was like this combination of listening to myself, getting curious about it, trying to figure out with the help of AI, talking to a doctor who didn't dismiss me, who actually listened, got the ultrasound, which led to the MRI, which then obviously they saw the mass. So it was like this combo of a bit of privilege in the sense that I knew how to use a tool that most people don't, maybe at that time didn't. And maybe even today, some people don't feel comfortable or even think about using it like that, So it was this combo of all of that. I think that it is a tool that could help close the gap in terms of whether it's because, you come from a certain community, or because you're a female, like you own a female body, because that's a huge gap in research right now. Like most research that we have is like was done in the past on male bodies. And so oftentimes like women are just seen as like a man's body, but different. It's like, no, it's its own system. And we now know that, like, for example, heart disease and heart attacks don't show up the same way in women, and we know that. So now the question is like, well, what else are we not diagnosing and misdiagnosing because we just think of women as men with boobs, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like recognizing that. And I feel like that's where AI could be really interesting in closing that gap, because I don't have 10 to 15 years to wait for the actual traditional research to catch up. Whereas with AI, like, I can use it to empower myself and understand things faster than my doctor, who has not even maybe seen a research study but the AI did access, right? So it's like recognizing that it can now access a study that my doctor doesn't even know about, you know?
You had mentioned your doctor was like right there with you and sort of following the lead of your instincts and AIs. Did you tell your doctor eventually that you did research through AI before?
I think I did, but at that time it was like such a new thing that she was like, oh, like she couldn't even fathom like what that would look like. And she was like, oh, like just be careful though, like, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
And I was like, yeah, no, for sure. But she also, like, she knows who I am, and she knows like my background. So she's like, I trust you, but like take care of your mental health too. Which she was right, because it can be good, but it could also be something where you're like every little thing, and you're like, oh my gosh, I felt like a little pinch on my side. Is it cancer? Like, you know,
Yes.
So you can go down a rabbit hole for sure.
100%. And people do that on Reddit or the internet, which is dying
Or even
in its own
Googling,
way,
right?
but right. So there is a balance, but I think above all, you had a gut feeling, you did have an instinct, and you acted on it. And with that, I think self-awareness plays a huge part of like
Absolutely.
knowing our body, knowing ourselves, the periods, those kinds of things that sort of help tell a story of our health. We do sometimes get caught up in life and not stay present and look at symptoms and things like that. So I think even that in itself is such a good message, whether, you know, AI was there to help or not. You had a feeling, you had something that was off, and you stuck with it and you continued to sift that out. And I think that's a thing where some of us maybe kind of let go or stop, because there's a lot of fear when it comes to medics, and sometimes knowing more is scary, even though it could save our butts. So for women who may be stuck in this limbo of like something's wrong, but maybe no one's listening, what would you say to those women right now?
So I'm going to take like an engineering take on this. Okay. So as engineers, you know, we build machines. So I'm going to talk about a car. So imagine you're driving your car and you look at your dashboard and there's nothing on it. It's like a blank dashboard. So you don't see whether you're running out of fuel. You don't see how fast you're going. And then suddenly your car stops. And so your car stops and you're like, you have no idea why it stopped and what's going on, right? And so what I'm getting at is, if you think of, let's say, your fuel gauge, right? It's like the sensor that's able to give you feedback to let you know that your fuel is going down and that you're going to need to pull over and fill it up. Otherwise, your car is going to stop working. And so the parallel I'm making here is pain is the fuel sensor. So pain is our systems, if our body is the system, our machine's way of sending us a signal that you need to like tune in and figure out what it is, because how else can our body communicate with us? So it's like recognizing pain as not something to suppress, not something to mute, but rather something to tune into. Like if it was like a radio channel and you're like, let me go in and like listen to that. Where is it coming from? What's going on? It's a form of communication from our body to us that something needs to be taken care of. And I think that's really important to talk about in our communities, because we do have a tendency to want to say, you know, don't, it's weakness and put it aside, don't talk about it. And so we've gotten really good, unfortunately, at muting it. And so that's like driving that car that I said with a blank dashboard. Like you think it looks fine, but just because you can't see the signal doesn't mean that your tank's not getting empty, doesn't mean that the other thing or whatever is not about to break, right? So recognizing that, becoming good at tuning out of your pain signals because you've gotten so good at suppressing them is not actually a good thing. That's dangerous for you. Who's going to say, imagine you're on your deathbed and you're like, oh, you know, what a life you lived and he never complained.
Like there's no medal for silent suffering. Like there's no prize at the end of the day. And I think there's so much pride in it though, but we're not gaining anything. We're not getting anything out of who stayed silent the longest. So it's like
the price that you pay, who pays the price for it is you. Yeah, and I think that is just so important, like in our communities, to break this whole idea of the stoicism or whatever, and like just learning to recognize that the better thing to do is to tune in, is to listen to it, is to get curious about, oh, what is that signal? What does it mean? What can I do? Who can help me? And to act on it, you know? So you're right. Like, I think that is really like why I'm here, because I was like, that's not normal. That's not normal. Well, these things are adding up. Maybe I should go get checked, you know, eventually. That's what led to the diagnosis.
Can I ask you, what was your initial reaction after your diagnosis? You have an engineer brain. Even how you explain the whole car analogy, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm learning so much. And you're doing it in a way that's not evoking reaction. You're very good at sharing this information. I would imagine your support group would be phenomenal because you have this logical sort of sense to you. I am curious though, was that logical sense sort of like in the forefront? How was it emotionally, mentally, spiritually for you? And now you're finding out that you're diagnosed with ovarian cancer.
Mm-hmm. I think my thing, like if I was a product that you could buy at a store, the slogan would be, she'll show you, you know?
Yeah.
And, so I think like that's just like my default mode whenever I'm facing something that's challenging or like adversity. So I think like there's a bunch of things happening. So because I was using AI already and had already started saying cancer, even though I was like being like, no, not that, something else, like what else, you know, be more realistic. And so even though I wasn't giving it the attention that maybe I should have, it was still subconsciously registering, right? Like I still saw the word cancer. And so as things were progressing, and when we were talking about, you know, oh, there's a mass, but we don't know what it is. Maybe it's a cyst or whatever. Will we need imaging? At that point, I was like, okay, this is cancer. Like in my head, I was like, yeah, this is probably cancer. And I kind of had like a slow burn, if you will, because of the use of AI. I felt mentally prepared to hear it, and almost in a weird way, like when I heard it, I felt almost satisfied that it was something that I could name. Not that it was cancer, that it had, like it was identified, that it wasn't in my head, that it wasn't, like I'm not going nuts, you know, it had a name and it had a box I could put into and say, okay, I can name this and deal with it. So, and I think from that moment, I went into like this, you know, like really put on like my engineer project manager hat. And I was like, okay, this is like a project. So,
yeah. And
I actually even said that to my doctor. I was like, okay, I'm going to go into project management mode. I need to know like, who's on my team? Like who do I need to connect with? Like who, you know, what does that look like? What type of oncologist? Oh, okay. It's going to be a gynae oncologist. Okay, great. Where is she? How do we do that? You know, I just went into this like, you know, what's the deadline? What does the schedule look like? And what are the resources and tools? You know, what do I need chemo? Do I need surgery? I think the message here was more about recognizing that we all have our experiences, whether it's professional or personal, and they have given us tools throughout our lives. And I think the trick is in knowing how to go back to that toolbox and say, okay, I can use this skill set to help me navigate this challenge and like adapt it, and, you know, transferable skills type of thing. So that's kind of how I was dealing with it up front. But of course, you know, it was like, I'm a human being. So for sure I was having moments where I would need to just sit down and it would just be like a rush of emotions of like, what is going on? And just have this moment of like, is this really happening? Like, what is this? And almost like disbelief. But then I would go back into like this mode of like, okay, like we've done the thing, we've cried about it now. Okay, now what's next? But really it was during treatment that I feel like it was very much a roller coaster, because then you actually see like, you know, your hair falls and all of that. You see yourself looking weaker, being really extremely tired. having no energy. Like I would walk around the block and my heart rate would just jump to like 160 beats per minute. Like those things made me gonna go like, this is really happening, right? But even then, like during treatment, you're seen like every 3 weeks because treatment is every 3 weeks. So you're just so well surrounded that you don't really get time to really process. So like as you're going down that like emotional kind of slope, or even physically because you're not feeling good, then you get back up because then you're seen again and then you feel well supported. So it was really, I feel like at the end of treatment, so that was like September of 2023, like when treatment ends and then you're not seen every 3 weeks, you're going to be seen every 3 months. So that I think that first month when I didn't see someone after that 3 weeks, I think that's when I really started to process on a more psychological, emotional level of like, oh snap, like this just happened and like what does this mean? So that's when really my processing probably started, because that's when like the fear of recurrence and all of that started to slowly creep up, because now I was like, oh, I don't have treatment's over, what will now guarantee that it doesn't come back? So the very thing I was fearing to start, like, when they first told me you're going to need chemo, I was like, oh gosh, ew, like, I don't want to go through that. But then very quickly it became a crutch. And I was like, oh, well, every 3 weeks I have this thing that, protects me from more cancer. But then when that thing stops, then you're like, oh, now it protects me from a recurrence or something, And so that was the processing that I had to do, and go get the help, like go get therapy. Again, something that a lot of South Asians won't do, I think. I hope that's changing though. It was very helpful. I feel like at that point I was like, look, I want to focus on what my goal is, and my goal is to get better, and my goal is to be here for my kids who at the time of diagnosis were like 3 and 6, so it was like, I want to be here for them, and to be here for them I need to ask all the questions. I can't hide details or information. Like pride cannot get in the way of me being their mom. So I feel like saying it like that helps, and like just saying the things you need to say, even if they feel taboo or they feel awkward. It's like, yeah, but who cares? These questions will allow me to be here for my kids. Like, and that's kind of like I was focused on, the goal.
Just going back to that mantra of I'm going to show them. I think so many women of color in particular, are carrying that. And maybe we can unpack that a little bit. I get that you had the content part of like, I got to go point A to point B, and that's helpful to do these sorts of things. But if we break down the process part, what might one be carrying underneath all of the appointments, and I got to do this and I got to do that and I got to be here, I got to do that. When we break down that pride, like, as an immigrant, a South Asian woman, a mother, all these sort of hats that you have to wear, what pressures come with being expected to succeed, and then now succeeding means to survive? What expectations did you realistically have to live with? And maybe there's some women listening today that we can help them unpack a little bit of that too.
So that's really interesting, because I feel that there was definitely, now looking back, I'm like, it's like you're in the initial like phases. I now recognize I was in this like weird like warrior survival mode.
Yeah.
Where it was almost like that mode was like protecting me from going too deep in the emotional processing stuff, because it's almost like your body and your brain only have so much energy to spend in that survival mode. So it's like protecting you from going there. It's like not letting you go there, basically, And then once that stops, and it's like, okay, now that you've survived, now we clean up. So it's like the picture I really get is like a war, like really like a battlefield, where you're just like, we gotta get the bad guys. And then once you get the bad guys and you look around, you're like, oh my gosh, look at all the collateral damage, right? You're not gonna be building while in the war, right? I do feel like there was a part of me that obviously needed to survive, but also wanted to not make it hard for others. And so it was like making people feel like it'll be fine. Don't worry about me. Like that feeling, of saying, oh, it's okay. Like, it's okay, but it wasn't okay. And it's like, oh, I don't want to burden you with this type of thing, whether it was like my parents or my family or whoever. And so it was like, I only knew that there were only a few people that could handle that burden, that I could share it with, that I could offload to. But I knew that not everybody could handle it. And I don't know, I was kind of okay with that because I tried it and it didn't work. And I was like, ooh, and then you have to work harder to fix that. And I was like, so it was very quickly I recognized, okay, who are the people who I could really go to and have like real conversations about what I'm going through. And honestly, the best people are people who are going through it. You can only truly connect with someone who's gone through, who can really understand, who is not looking at you with like, oh, poor you, those like, because they're in that situation. So it's like this weird like dynamic of, you don't want pity, you don't want necessarily sympathy, you want empathy. And there's such a big difference between that. But like when you live it, it's like, it makes a big difference. And so I think it's, I don't know. It's hard though. Like I don't know what advice I'd give other than like reach out to people who are going through something similar, or who have been going through something similar or did in the past. And I think that really helps to like navigate, or even just get like just practical advice on like what to say to your doctor or what to say to your family, how to have these conversations, and like this conversation that we're having right now of like recognizing that, it sucks, but the fact of the matter is not everybody will be able to give you the things you need. And you might have to kind of look at your friends group or your family group and be like, okay, that person, I can connect with them when I want distraction and I don't want to think about this.
Right.
That person I can really have a deep conversation with, and they can hold space for me. And like recognizing that it's going to be like that, because otherwise you're going to be more exhausted trying to get the things you want for people who just can't give them to you. It's almost like do yourself a favor and save your energy and like do that work up front, because otherwise it's like really exhausting emotionally. And I've had so many conversations with people who for who it was really devastating to not get the things they needed from their best friend, and it was like, yeah, it sucks, but you can't force someone to give you something they can't,
Yeah. It's empathy, sympathy, all those things. I think everyone knows where they're good or where they need to work at. But when you're not the one that's truly experiencing something like cancer, it is hard to truly know how to be there for people. And I think as the community around a loved one that's experiencing cancer, I think we have to also recognize that we also can't be there in the same way that we want to. Because I would imagine all those other friends and family members would hope that you would pick them to have those deep conversations and stuff, because people want to be there for each other. But the reality is we don't really know how to do that. Like it's a big thing. And I think the other part is when we come from a community where we really don't talk about things in general and we're very surfacey, not to say all, but many of us are.
Overall,
how do we even know to be there and have a deep talk with someone, without having had 10,000 tequila shots first or whatnot that most people have to before they have an emotional talk? So I think we also have to be realistic. Like if I want to be there for a loved one who's experiencing something like cancer, then I also have to do some work and some self-awareness building to get to that place too. And hopefully I'm not doing it when someone is diagnosed. Like I'm already there wanting to do this work so that I can be available, not just to myself, but for a community member. If I can ask you, did you ever have a conversation with death? Like, did you talk to death? Did you ask death questions? Death is such a taboo for us in our community. We don't really go there. And when you are on the path of going through cancer treatment, I don't even know if it's fair to ask this question, but I'm curious about, do you, as someone that's experiencing cancer and going through treatment, talk to death?
I guess like for me specifically, it was more like, in general, like the having a diagnosis at such a young age did make me feel, I guess, more aware and like, it's like, I call it getting intimate with your mortality. It's like recognizing that, you know, when we say like, oh, we're all going to die, it's just such a kind of like a distant idea. Like, you know, it feels so far away, especially when you're 36, like you're not thinking about dying. After having a diagnosis, it's very like, okay, that's a very real thing. Like it's not this idea. It's a real thing, right? And then when you get that intimate with mortality, I think what it did for me was it made me a bit more pragmatic. It made me shift perspective. So, for example, one of the first things I did was like, I wrote a will, you know, like before even getting my surgery. So, like, just to give you a frame of reference. So, I got diagnosed. Technically, it wasn't a diagnosis, but they could only diagnose me once they took the mass out. So, once they were like, this is, you know, we're suspecting cancer, you're going to need surgery. I had about 2 weeks between that time, surgery, and then after surgery for a week, 4 weeks after surgery, treatment started. So between the moment that they said this looks like cancer and surgery, those 2 weeks, I was in like preparation mode. Like I was like, okay, gotta write a will, gotta do this, gotta do that, gotta make sure that everything will be fine. We're in worst case scenario. Like this idea of what if I don't wake up from surgery was what was in my head, you know? And so that those 2 weeks was really when I was like facing death, you know, it was like the what ifs around it, like those uncomfortable feelings of like, this could happen. I don't know. Maybe it probably won't, but it could. And I think just having experienced that made it that like when I woke up that, you know, after surgery, I felt like I had a new life. Like I felt like someone did die, like the person that was me before surgery did die. And like now the person like literally rising from that surgery room or whatever you want to call it was a new person. And this person had a completely different perspective on life, completely different way of dealing with things, completely different self-worth and idea around like who I am and if I'm enough. You know, like the pre-surgery Alvina would have wanted to do certain things and would say, oh, do I have enough qualifications to do it? Oh, I'm not, you know, I got to do this. I got to do that training or this training or that thing to like prove myself even that I'm good enough to do it. Versus now I'm like, no, I am good enough. I am the best thing I've ever been up to now. Like the me now is the culmination of all the stuff I've done. So technically I'm the best I've ever been today. You know, like this is my best. And recognizing that and like seeing things from the other side. It's almost like you're standing on the side of death and looking at you evolving versus standing like this and seeing yourself growing and you're trying to reach something. And when you do that shift, you're like, oh my gosh, you acknowledge all the things you've done. You're able to see your life. Like that thing of your life flashing past you is like, but you see it, but in like a positive way because you didn't die. You got to live. Mm-hmm. So it like really kind of flipped everything in my head of like, oh no, I am good enough. I am this and I can do that. And I'm getting the second chance. So I better use it well. Maybe it does create a little bit of FOMO and YOLO, but like in like a good way, in like a way that doesn't make me feel like I need to prove something, but more recognizing the fact that, yeah, this is this one little life I get to live and that thankfully I get to continue to live. And I'm just really hyper aware of that reality now, I guess.
Yeah. I think I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm wondering for like even our community, what are some things that like, or a place people can start with? Because a lot of what I hear you talking about is shifting from that place of keeping it inside, I'm going to show them, to like having faith in yourself, believing in yourself, and like, I'm showing myself, as you said. And so when we talk about this silent suffering and why is it a thing, like what is one way that as a community we can break that so that, okay, fine, one might be diagnosed with cancer to go through it, but do we have to go through that? Do we have to get close to a near-death experience before we start to shift this place of like, how do I find my existence and my okay in this one little life that, like, as you said, we have to live? Is there something that you would suggest to folks today that we can start now instead of waiting for something terrible to happen?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's hard. It's definitely hard to say, like, like if I'm thinking back to myself, like what could have someone said to me before that would really truly change perspectives. And honestly, I think that I don't know if there's truly something that we can say other than what we already hear people saying, like, oh, like everything we just said, like I'm not the first one saying it, right? So I think it's really about looking at, like, what do we really value? Like really sit down and like think about what are the things we truly value and why do we value them, and not stop at just like these are my values. Because one thing I've come to realize is that we sometimes have values that we inherited because of the culture we were raised in, because of our families. So there's like these cultural values and then there's these societal values. But then some of them, in all that like list of values, some of them are really truly your core values as a person, And it's recognizing that you can sit with this list and be like, okay, this belongs to me and this does not belong to me. And I don't accept that. Like, you don't have to carry it with you and keep playing that game, right? And to recognize that if you are feeling exhausted, that's again a signal that that value does not align with who you are actually. And so it's okay to let it go. It's okay to not play that game if it's not serving you or your loved ones, right? So like, let's say like this whole silence thing, this whole idea of this, valuing perfection and valuing this idea that nothing is wrong and that nothing is wrong is strength. Well, to flip that over is like, well, if nothing is wrong is strength, well, how do you know that you're strong then? Because if you've never experienced a challenge, how can you, like, what proof do you have? So it's almost like saying, like, it makes more sense to admit that, like, I'm going through something hard and I am going through it. And then when you do come out of it, and then you can say, look, I overcame something and therefore I'm strong. Like, it's like, it's like almost like using your own kind of idea and like flipping it on its head and saying, like, well, how is nothing a sign of strength? Like, you know, whatever other ideas like that we have of like, oh, don't share. It's like, well, but isn't sharing the harder thing to do?
Yeah.
And so then if you do the hard thing, isn't that what shows you that you can do hard things? So it's like really flipping everything and questioning it from a different angle, but recognizing that, oh, you can literally flip anything and realize that you could do it differently. You know?
Suffering in silence is the easier way out. We could say that instead of saying talking it out is the harder route, and there's more pride there. It's like, and it's what you said from the beginning. It's being curious with these like beliefs and values. Where do they come from and why do they exist? Some of them exist because of survival. Some of them exist because they served us up until a certain point. But as humans, we're evolving, whether we recognize it or not. And some of these belief systems we've had will not serve us from the minute we're born till the minute we die. They will change over time. That's natural. And I think sometimes we hold on to things that because we've just done it, that old jacket that's in the back of my closet, I don't want to let go of, but I never wear it. Why is it taking up space in my closet? Why do I keep it? Maybe it holds some kind of symbolic value or whatnot. And I think that's like our value system, as you're saying as well. And there's this measuring stick though, that somehow someone's created, or we've said someone's created about what is going through something hard. And so it's just, when we talk about grief and loss in recovery, sometimes it's like, well, you went through something harder than I ever will because you overcame cancer. So therefore you're strong. And I'm just some woman over here doing something else. And I think we have to recognize,
so many thoughts on that.
Right? Like we have to recognize, like we all go through our hardships, and one hardship's not better or worse than the other. That's our lived experience. And you actually made a really interesting point. You said something powerful at our consult. You said events happen and we create the experience of them. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, for sure. But I just want to say, like, to your last point, like, I think something that we all need to like say repeatedly until we really understand it is that suffering is not a competition, and recognize that suffering is relative to us. If I lived a life up here and then I fell down here, I would feel that loss. So I cannot compare that. No one will understand that loss other than me, right? So that's like something that I feel like we really need to kind of embrace.
100%.
But yeah, going back to the idea of like events. So it's like, it's like recognizing that, things happen and in themselves, that thing doesn't have an emotion. Like cancer doesn't have feelings, right? So it happened. And then in the beginning, I remember thinking, obviously, as everyone does, like, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? And so in saying that, I was like, wow, like I am giving all of my agency away and giving it to the cancer and saying like, you happened to me. Right. And then, I mean, it didn't take long, but that's because I have, I do coaching and I was like, let me coach myself out of this, And so I was like, well, what would I say to a client? I would say, look, cancer happened, a diagnosis happened. What is a better question to ask instead of why is this happening? It's maybe perhaps saying, this is happening. What purpose, if any, do I want to assign to it? And you can decide not to assign it anything. You could be like, no, it just happened and whatever. Like we're gonna move on. But for me, I needed to have something. I needed to make sense of this because I guess my way of looking at it was like, I am not going to let this thing just happen and like make a mess out of my life. I need to assign it some kind of purpose so that I feel like I have control and that I am doing something with this and it needs to make sense,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of how I looked at it. And I said like, well, I get to design the experience of what happens after when someone says to me, you have cancer, right? And so that's kind of what I did with it. And I really lived it and embodied it. Like I really went into patient advocacy, patient partnerships and things like that. I got really involved in different organizations. I'm now sitting on the board of Ovarian Cancer Canada. I'm sitting on the board of the Quebec Cancer Coalition. And it wasn't like my intention. My intention was, it all started with me saying, I want to share my experience because I think there's not enough people in our community doing it. And my hope was, at first it was more like, I know I can't carry this burden alone, and so I cannot keep this in. So I wrote a Facebook post. And the feedback from that was like what I needed, that love and support that people gave me, like, you're going to get through this, like, you got this, all of that. But then a secondary thing happened that slowly shifted to becoming like the main thing that I ended up focusing on now, which is that by being vulnerable, I feel like I started a domino effect where people were then writing to me saying like, oh, you sharing that, it's so powerful. Like I went through this too. And now I feel like I've been keeping that inside me for so long and now I can release it. Like it's almost like seeing you do it gave me the opportunity to give myself permission to also release it, and not hold it. And my mom would also come to me, and she lives in New Jersey. My parents live in New Jersey, and she was like, oh, in our community in New Jersey, there was these people who came up to us and said like, oh, I went through this, and I went through it. Like people they knew for years that had no idea, and my parents had no idea they had gone through things like that. And I was like, it was so cool because it was like creating this ripple effect in our communities where people were like, oh, I don't have to suffer alone. What a new concept, and how freeing it was. So, and this kind of ties back to like, what you were saying earlier of like, how do we shift those values? And let's say someone's like, well, I don't want to burden others. It's by recognizing like, well, maybe when you share, you're not burdening necessarily other people, right? Like what you're doing is you are kind of, I guess, load sharing, like, so instead of whatever that load is, just teeter-tottering on you alone, you're trying to balance this huge thing. Well, now you've kind of dispersed it, and there's many people lifting you. But then in doing that also, you're demonstrating how, just like someone observing that will see like, oh, look, this person shared something and all these people supported them. Oh, maybe I can do that too. And so in doing that, you're actually creating a support system for the community, and you're normalizing this idea. And so in essence, you're not burdening anyone. You're actually helping other people free themselves because they've been holding on to things maybe for years because they just never felt safe enough. You've now made it safe. It's like creating psychological safety, I think, is the best way to describe it, and making it trendier.
Yeah, like, look, I do too. Yeah, I think that's so well said. At the end of the day, we're just scratching the surface. We're just starting to open the door to these kind of conversations, and we're not perfect at it. We don't have a manual that comes along with healing, but we are learning. The more that we get it out, the more we understand, the more it makes sense. When it's in our head and in our body, it comes out in all sorts of unsafe, toxic ways. You can look at the correlation of holding things within and then addiction and mental health issues, all these kinds of things that are also on the sidelines in our community. And they're not just happening because they happen, they're coming as a symptom. And when we do open that door, like you say, and we share and we become vulnerable and say, oh my God, this thing over here is happening to me, like you did when you put that Facebook post out, you're right. You didn't really know what was going to come out of it. And I think that also is like when you talk about events and experiences, it's like we try to control things like events that we don't have control over. We don't know what life's going to bring, but we can be in charge of the experience and how we choose to live through it. And that's really up to us. And that's what you've done with your diagnosis. You've made an experience. You're on the board. You're helping people. You're coaching. And you're opening doors, unlocking things that so many people, I think, just couldn't find the right key for, or didn't know how to do. And it's such simple little things, like even today coming on and having this conversation. However, many people, but at the end of the day, one person will take something from this, which is, okay, I got to let it out. And if I let it out, maybe someone else, it's a positive chain reaction. Maybe someone else can let it out even more. And then together, who knows where we're going to go. And I think that right there is like the beauty of what you're doing, what you and Harjeet have created with Chai and Hope, a support group where family members, people that have experienced cancer, anyone that's in the community that's, being impacted can come to a safe space and talk about what the fuck is this thing? Am I allowed to be mad or sad or what? Because sometimes I think as our community, we're so limited with emotions that we're born with. Like in the Western world, you have 1,000 ways to feel things. And in our community, we're just learning the language of that. And that pillow that psychologists have with, the emotion wheel, it's overwhelming when you look at it because you're like, oh my gosh, I have access to that many feelings. And I think when a support group like yours is created, it allows our community and those that are brave to come to these groups, learn more language and validation of, oh, it's normal that this is happening. I'm not the only one. I'm experiencing it in my way, but 3,000 other people are also sitting here saying that was rough for them or they lost community members. So I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah. And I think like there's like a huge thing in general, like in South Asia and like there's like different religions, but at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of like the spiritual kind of unfortunate links that have been made kind of sometimes exacerbate. So like, for example, I know coming from a Pakistani background, like a Muslim background, like I know how many times I've heard people say things like, oh, I don't get why this is happening. I'm such a good person. Or so like they're kind of creating a link with maybe I did something or maybe it's punishment and then from Harjeet's stories, I heard things like, related to like karma and like maybe you did something in your past life. And so it's like already you're going through something so hard. And then there's like this layer of guilt, like as if you deserve it. It's your fault. And it's like, I think the message I want to give is like, no, it's not your fault. It's almost like saying like, let's say you're like out on the ocean and driving your boat around and then suddenly there was a storm. And you're saying like, oh my gosh, did I cause the storm? Like, no, the storm just happened and it's affecting you. And maybe you have a boat now that's a bit more rinky dinky, but your job is not to question the storm. Your job is to make it through it, And so I think if we could do that and kind of help people kind of remove like this need to question the storm and to figure out like, do I deserve it? Do I need it? It's like, no, just get through it. Like, get through it. And then if you need to go look back and figure that out and make the connections you need to make sense of it, like how I did, like, okay, I need to make something out of this. Yeah. Fine. But at first it's like making it okay as a community to cheer people on so they can actually at least make it through the storm. It really breaks my heart when I see like how a lot of people get really pushed into living this like literally in a closed room, and they're not allowed to step out of their rooms because nobody wants to see your bald head, or other people asking you like, could you wear something on your head because we don't want to see you like that. It's like, that's a lot. Like, that's really heavy, you know. And it's like saying like, can we just
Yeah.
focus on like just being human first, and like forget all that stuff? Is there a way we can do that?
Yeah, there's so many taboos. You're right. Like the hair loss. I mean, hair is such a important part in our communities, whether it's for men, women, it's part of religion. And the hair loss, because you can physically see that. I've even Harjeet's talked about that too, is exactly cover your head. And I think you're right. We have to stop these sorts of things that we become so fearful of, because at the end of the day, again, it's not about me. It's about how am I able to show up for you who's experiencing this. You've just had treatment, you've lost your hair, and now I'm feeling, reactive towards something that you're experiencing. And that's for me to go figure out in my own corner over here for a second around like, why do I care so much about your bald head?
Yeah, what is this discomfort? Where is it coming from?
Totally. Like, where's this? And it comes down to vanity and all these kinds of things that we've been conditioned to believe, and a lot of it's in the subconscious. We don't even realize why we're saying the things we say. I
think a lot of it maybe also comes from, or at least some of it maybe comes from, especially from older generations, because it comes from a place of like being so overprotected that we don't know how to respond. It's like seeing the color pink for the first time if you're only used to gray. Like, you're going to react to that and you're going to be like, oh, I don't like that. But it's like, wait, is it because you don't like it, or is it because you've never seen the color before and now you're feeling feelings that you don't know how to manage because you've never had to, and no one has showed you how to manage them, right? And so there's this whole thing around like recognizing that, I feel like human beings, we tend to fear things that are different, but then we also we forget though that at the same time, as human beings, we're so adaptive. We adapt quite fast to change. It's just that we have this huge wall of fear that makes us think that change is going to be really, really horrible. But then once you actually just step on the other side, you're like, oh, okay, I can deal. And so it's about taking that one step and recognizing that the fear itself is usually much bigger and much more dramatic than the actual thing. And I can apply that to anything, even like the way I experienced cancer, like the idea of, oh my gosh, I'm going to start chemo, or oh my gosh, like I had a lot of oh my goshes, but once I was on the other side, I was like, oh, I did it and I adapted. And even like with the chemo thing, at one point I adapted too much in the sense that I was like, oh no, chemo ended, now what's going to happen? Whereas before starting it, I was like, oh no, I don't want to start chemo, I don't want to go through that, So it's like recognizing that it can seem scary to take that first step, but once you do, you realize that you are equipped as a human being to adapt to that change and evolve with it and learn from it. I feel really strongly about like having these conversations because I think, as a community, we talk a lot about like how we are this very communal culture, and for other things we are very much so. Like, like this idea of everybody shows up and we want to do these things together. We have the most massive weddings and things like that. It's like, okay, and great, that's good. But let's take that and say, well, when it comes to sickness and helping someone, like looking at that as a community event too, as in like, let's all show up. Like, we know how to show up. So let's use that and put it here. And again, flip that idea of, oh, well, we don't want to go near someone who's sick but isn't that going against your values of community? Yeah. And so use that part of you and put it here. So that's
like celebrations, even funerals, all these kinds of things for sure. But I think the conditioning, I mean, I always bring this up, but a lot of this comes from colonization. How our motherland was taken over and the fear that was put in for generations, that even today that fear exists going all the way down to me. And a lot of people don't believe in epigenetics and generational trauma and all that kind of stuff. And that's unfortunate because that helps us heal and understand where some of that fear-based mentality comes from.
The whole idea of fear, and as a colonized people, that makes so much sense. It's like, we don't want to be seen as different because being different got us in trouble in the past. And so now it's like, no, we're perfect. We're not diseased and we're fine and we are perfect. And so like, hire us to work on your fields, you know? Like, the shift that's happening in like the West of like, oh, you know, yoga is good and, you know, eating veggies and stuff. It's like, that was literally the diet of South Asia. Like, that's literally how we lived our lives, in movement, with being connected to the ground, like sitting on the ground to eat with our hands. And like, there's all this research now, like, oh, when you eat with your hands, it's actually better for your brain body connection. And I was like, these are all things we were told in our entire lives, that these are things that made us bad.
Yeah.
So it's really messed up.
And now here we are, I'm carrying that fear talking about cancer with you, and my own defense mechanisms are going up. And maybe I don't have the bird's eye view to look at, well, where did this fear come from? But maybe where I can start with is that it exists. The fear is there. I'm afraid of something. And, you know, you've been saying this all along, is bring curiosity with you with, okay, why am I so afraid? Am I afraid for me? Am I afraid for you? Somebody taught me something. Like you said, we show up for celebrations when we know what's going to happen, even if it's a death, like a funeral, we can show up. It's the transitions that we're very scared of as a community because it's very unknown. And so when somebody shows up with a diagnosis, there's a lot of unknowns and we become fearful. I don't know how to adjust to who you're becoming as you lose your hair and you're not able to walk around the block like you used to. Meanwhile, I'm used to this other version of you. And I think grief and loss is such a big part that we miss out on. We think grief and loss comes from literally losing someone, but it shows up when we're growing, when we're learning, and in these little transitions, in these spaces. And you've in your own way talked about allowing these spaces to happen. That's how we process. That's how we get through these sorts of, like you said, adapting. It's because we are saying, oh, there's this huge space that I'm going to walk through. Like, it's a hallway. Walking through these hallways where we don't know where we're going until we get to that door. And honestly, for people like you, what I'm appreciative of is that you go through a life-changing experience like cancer, and then you continue to show up for the community, a community that's not always there for you or us. And I think the message for the rest of the community is there is resilience. We do have this love for each other and in the end, like, allow people to walk in and be there for us. You're wanting to educate our community because you don't want people to go through the things that, like you said, you're hearing many people have to experience on their own. And that's not acceptable. And we can be barrier breakers. And I think that's the cool part of where we're at in this world, is we are at a place where we get to break these barriers and say, you don't have to experience this on your own. You have a community. Maybe it's not your blood, but there is a community of people available to you so that you're not alone, because no one can and should be going through an experience like cancer on their own. That's not acceptable. Like, can you imagine having gone through all that I mean, your husband didn't know what to do. It's not like he had a manual. So maybe you can kind of bring his voice into this. Like, how does someone that is sleeping next to someone that's going through it, and he's got his own process as the father of both your children, what are some key things that he sort of did to be there for you, to take care of himself and the kids and all that? Because I'm sure he played a huge part of this.
Of course. Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest things was, like, he just gave me the space I needed to, like, do the things I needed to do to, go through that storm. I think allowing me to acknowledge that there's a storm, it exists, not avoiding it or, like, not talking about it or things like that. It was really like, no, this is real, it's happening, and we are here, but we're gonna go through it together. So it's like recognizing, like, I'm maybe on that boat alone, but that people can send me supplies. I still have to face that storm, but you can send me love and support and a little pat on the back or whatever to get me through it. And I think that's kind of like the huge part of that was making that happen, like creating that space so I could do it. So, he took on the role of almost being like, like a solo dad, because I wasn't able to do like almost anything. I couldn't play with my little kids or run around, or I had to be super careful. Actually, I couldn't catch anything from them and their little kids going to school licking everything. So, so like he took on that role of being mom and dad on some occasions. And I actually, after our consult, I actually asked him, I was like, so how did you what were the ways that you process some of this? And he was like, well, because at that time he started to run a lot, and he was like, oh, I used to run it out. Like I needed to run, I need to get it out of my body, because he's like, Alvina, I couldn't just come up to you and be like, this is hard, hon. Like I can't talk to the person going through and be like, this is hard. Even though I was like, no, I think you could have. He's like, no, I couldn't. How could I do that? Like you're going, I was like, yeah, okay, maybe, but these are hard truths. And so he was like, well, I wanted to make you feel that that you can depend on me, that you can rely on me, that you don't have to worry about anything but getting better, so you can focus on that. And the way I dealt with it was I talked to my friends about it. I would go run. I would talk to whoever was willing to listen, but his main thing was running. And he's more of an introvert too, so he needed to get it out of his body, and so it kind of goes back to what you're saying, not keeping it in, and his way of taking it out was running. He ran it out of his system.
Sweat it out, right? We don't talk it out, we don't get it out, we act it out in other ways, unhealthy ways. And good for him to find, honestly, I would imagine carrying the load as the loved one next to you. There's a lot of physical things that are probably happening, that running makes so much sense to just physically get that out, because movement is healing on so many levels. Good for him for doing that and finding his way too, because sometimes you think, again, comparing, well, if she's going through this and I should just suffer and whatnot, but that's not helpful either. He's going through his experience in his own way, whether he wants to admit it or not. So, and good for him to also, I get why he didn't come to you about those things, because even though you're like, yeah, you could. And I think many of us would be like, yeah, you could. But at the same time, good for him for not. Because I think there's a different way to show up, but he had people in his corner that he could fall apart with at the time, and that's a key, is like you said, who are those people? There has to be a space to be able to do that. So maybe as we're wrapping up here, we're talking about silence and we're talking about being strong. In your mind, how would you define the difference between being silent and being strong?
I think it depends. So there could be, strength in silence in some situations, but not all. And I think that's something that we have to recognize, that the impact of not being silent starts with do it for yourself first, and then recognizing that by doing that you're doing it for the community, and then recognizing that once you've done those basic steps, then what it leads to is that if you're not speaking up, how are we going to improve that data? If we're pretending that we don't get sick, then how are we going to be included in that data, right? Yeah. So that's why I joined the board of Ovarian Cancer Canada, because I'm the only brown person, so saying, well, because I shared my journey, because it caught the attention of this organization, saying oh, we need your voice at the table. It's it's this thing of we want our voices to be heard, but we don't want to use our voices. For example, in my husband's case, if someone can argue that he was being silent because he didn't share it to me, but he wasn't being silent with himself, he was letting it out in other ways and talk to other people. Whereas it's not always the appropriate reaction to something. So if someone's insulting you, then maybe be silent and not escalate it. But if you're going through something and you're suffering, and that silence is going to lead to more suffering, then don't be silent. So it's thinking of what are the rules around silence, and thinking of it as when does silence make me feel better, right? Versus when is it actually making it worse, and not really think of it deeply, not just in that instant, but long-term effects of that silence. And are you silent because you're meditating, or are you silent because you're shoving something really deep down that's gonna fester and rot inside of you and make you feel worse over time? And so it's really getting deep into that, I think, is important. And so I think that strength is more about recognizing what do you need to do to feel better. And if that means not being silent, if that means reaching out of your comfort zone and asking for help, if it means talking to someone, it could mean talking to a total stranger. It could mean finding someone online who's going through something similar and connecting with them, or joining a Facebook group, or reaching out to an organization, like for example, in my case, it was Ovarian Cancer Canada, and saying, hey, like I need to do something. What can I do? I need to engage, right? So breaking silence can look different. It doesn't mean that you have to go post everything on Facebook. Like that's, so it's about recognizing, like, what does that mean? When does it serve me? And so it's like this, there's no straight answer, I guess, is my take on it, is that you have to evaluate, like, when is it actually healing and doing something for you that will help you feel better and make you go through something and come out of it better, stronger, feeling better.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not as simple. It's knowing the difference for yourself. And you're right. It's not being loud and an extrovert about something. It's about figuring out whether it's even starting with yourself. Sometimes we shut ourselves out of our own feelings. So like even allowing that awareness of like, this is really hard for me, starting there and figuring that out before it comes out. As we're kind of starting to get to this wrapping up part, maybe we can clarify and add to, at the beginning of the conversation, we talked about your symptoms and sort of how you start to figure it out. Would you add anything to that for those that are part of this conversation with ovarian cancer? What are symptoms like? What are some things people can look out for? Because this one, as you've mentioned, is a very difficult one to diagnose, and we don't find out until the later stages. So what are some signs and symptoms that we should be paying attention to as women?
That's honestly like a great question, because it's something that could be hard to detect, but like everything I'm going to say, we do have to make sure that it's about the constellation that it creates. So like, don't look at every single point as, okay, that's a symptom, I have it. It's not that. It's about recognizing that if you have many of these things happening at the same time, and that they're adding on, like that your list is getting long, or it's persisting for more than 3 weeks and it's feeling worse and worse, then it's time to act and not sit on it and not think of it like, oh, it'll go away on its own. So the main things are, like, a lot of women, it's just like bloating accompanied with like discomfort. It can be pelvic pain, so it could feel like menstrual cramps, but like different than your usual. It could be changes in your menstrual cycle, like abrupt changes that you're not expecting. And some women experience like back pain, like really low back pain. That's often because like if there's a mass, it's like pressing on nerves and things. So it like kind of the pain kind of is felt in the back instead. There's also in some women, it's like a higher rate of like headaches and things like that. So again, these symptoms could be anything. There's sometimes digestive issues too. But I think like the key message is like, if you aren't experiencing a couple of these together for a longer period of time that are sudden to you, as in it's not normal for your body to do that. So like, for example, for me, I knew that cramps were not normal. And the fact that the cramps were getting worse and worse and worse, that was not normal. Or that I got my period so early and didn't look right. The consistency didn't look right. Like, these were not normal for my body. So it's interesting because it ties back to like the initial stuff we were saying about really becoming aware of like, what's my normal? Like, what does my normal look like? What does my regular cycle look like? How do I usually feel in my regular monthly cycle? Not just during my period, but the rest of the month. Like, are there times I naturally feel bloated, and it doesn't have to be alarming, right? So like really getting to know how your body should work based on how it, like what the should is for you, like your normal. And as soon as that deviates and it persists and gets worse and gets painful, like to act and to not wait. And if ever you do want to be seen by someone, to ask for an ultrasound, because there is no test. So the pap smear does not detect ovarian cancer. And so there is no diagnostic test they can do and be like, oh, ovarian cancer. There is a blood test, but it's not reliable. And so it really has to start with imaging plus that blood test, which is called a CA-125 test. But these are the only two things when done together, and plus the person reporting their own symptoms and keeping note of them is what gets people diagnosed early. I think it comes back down to, especially as women, we have to tune in to our bodies a bit more and recognize, like, what's my normal? And when it's not normal, to not dismiss and not silence ourselves. The topic of silence.
Yeah.
You know?
And so this is very helpful. When one of us goes to the doctor with some of these symptoms and is a little worried, is it normal to expect that the doctor wouldn't automatically order the ultrasound? Is it normal to expect that I would have to advocate for myself and ask for that? Like, I think sometimes women understand their symptoms, but then the advocacy part and knowing how to talk to their doctor, like, not everyone has the doctor like that you have, which was like right there, trusted you, believed you. So is there something that we could be doing different or thinking about doing when we show up with symptoms at the doctor's office?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things that's really useful is, as soon as you think something is off, to like really start like a journal of what you're feeling when and like where, like what. And so, because that not only is good for your own self-assessment of awareness of like, hey, is it really because I ate something, or is it really because of whatever?
Yeah.
But also then to then be able to bring that to your doctor and say, like, here are the things I'm feeling. And so they can really see that list and help with that. But also, for sure, because the usual typical age of diagnosis is much higher. In younger people, it's very likely to get dismissed. And if you're slightly overweight, they might blame your weight for that and say, like, oh, it's just you're feeling, pressure, pains and stuff because you're overweight. So I do think that, unfortunately, if you are overweight, you do have to self-advocate way more, because unfortunately, all of the ovarian cancer survivors I've known who were a bit overweight, they were dismissed for like 2 years before they got a diagnosis, and it was much advanced stages. And so, knowing that unfortunate reality, I do think that self-advocating becomes very critical in ovarian cancer, especially. And because Ovarian Cancer Canada recognizes that, they've created like these tools online. So if anyone is ever suspecting, like, oh, I might be feeling something, they've made like these little sheets that you can fill out and then actually bring to your doctor, and has all kinds of. They even have like a booklet that like will ask you the questions, give you the resources, tell you like what questions to ask your doctor. So like really like a guide through diagnosis, treatment, and post-treatment and all that too. So there are resources out there. So if anyone's
Where could we find that?
It's on Ovarian Cancer Canada's website, which I can share with you if you want to.
Yeah, we can put that in the show notes for people as well. I think that's great that I'm finding that out for the first time today. So I would imagine a lot of people wouldn't even know that these tools do exist. And so looking for that, asking for that would be key. And maybe even bringing someone with you to help advocate at the doctor's office.
Absolutely.
If you're, like you're going through these symptoms, that's a lot in itself. To have someone you trust there with you to help talk through that might be helpful.
For sure. That's a really, really great point, for sure. And like, even for me, someone who's like very much like, oh yeah, I was like, all in, like learning, I still definitely needed my husband there. Like I could not, like I knew that I won't be able to process everything. Some people even record the conversation on their phones because it's hard to process. Like at the same time, it's like, you have cancer and blah, 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 blah. And like it's like, you hear like a little beep, like a tone in your head of like, I didn't hear anything you said. It was like,
yes,
the TV just turned off in my head.
Totally. I think that's a great idea. Recording that conversation, especially if you're going alone and you can't have someone there with you too. I think I would never have thought of that myself. And that, when you have to hear bad news, you can't get past anything but hearing the bad news. Is there anything else you would add about signs and symptoms that maybe we haven't talked about?
I think we did cover the main ones, but again, I think it's about making sure that you're aware of what your normal is. And I recognize that these are very everyday stuff, like, okay, bloating, but it's about recognizing, like, trusting that gut feeling like something is wrong, and the accumulation of these symptoms, and that it's not normal. Like, it's not something you feel. It's not a mass you'll feel. Like, for example, in breast cancer, we can feel a mass, and there's breast exams you can do. There's no like self-exam that you can do for ovarian cancer, because the mass is not always like a hard kind of mass.
Okay, so is there anything else that you wish we did talk about today that maybe we didn't and you'd like to go back and add to or clarify?
Maybe just like a general kind of, when it comes to any cancer, just to know that there's literally an organization for most cancers that's specifically dedicated to that cancer, whether it's to support patients or support funding. So even though we talked about ovarian cancer, but like, I think this could be useful to know, because a lot of people don't realize that there's someone beyond that doctor that you can reach out to. And I think especially in Canada, I think it's relevant to say this because, we have the right to have second opinions, but it's often really hard to actually get second opinions. Like, what is even the process of doing that?
That's a really good point. Yeah.
It's like, how do you even go get a second opinion? It's not like the States where you can just call an office, be like, I want to see a doctor, and book your appointment, right? So depending on which province you are, it's not an easy process. So I think that sometimes that's where these disease-specific organizations can play a really great role, because if you really think about it, they are the most well-educated on not just the disease itself, but also on like the patient side of it, like that information, those patient experiences. So they have anecdotal information that doctors often don't have, because they're getting information from research and stuff like that. Or if they did see that specific case of that specific cancer in their practice, then yes, maybe. But those disease-specific organizations have that information, and they can also connect you with people who've gone through something that can guide you through the process on what to do and not to do, and what to try differently because of their own experience. So I think they're like the hidden gem of the healthcare ecosystem that most people don't recognize.
To have someone that's been a few steps ahead of you, what a relief to be able to access, and grateful that there are people that volunteer their time. And most of this is through volunteer work. Going through, you're doing it too, Harjeet's doing it too. Like, you go through the process of cancer yourself, and then the time that you're giving back, because it's like, often I hear you don't want other people to go through what you went through without that. So you're adding to that. And I'm grateful for people like you who are doing the work that you're doing, so others don't have to suffer in silence.
Yeah, exactly.
So if people want to get in touch with you and ask you more questions, or join the group of Chai and Hope, where can they best get in touch with you? So
for Chai and Hope, we have at Chai and Hope on Instagram, in one word. And then for me personally, on Instagram, I'm at Coach Alvina. And then on LinkedIn, if you just type my name, Alvina Nadeem, you should find me there as well. And when I was really in the midst of the treatment and stuff, I started a TikTok. It's called OC Warrior Queen. And so it really gets into like the whole, like, I was really like using it as a journal, but also educating and talking about the symptoms in more detail and all that kind of stuff. So that's also there.
That's awesome. Like a little time capsule in some ways of carrying that along with you. I also want to note for Chai and Hope, it's like one more point of, we have a Punjabi and a Pakistani woman, to both of you together, talking about the taboo of cancer. Like, how amazing is that, breaking how many barriers just right there. So I think that is like so much to celebrate. And then lastly,
the India and Pakistan reunion.
100%, right? As there should be. Call to action. If there was one thing and only one thing people today took from your episode, what do you hope that one thing is?
I think it would be to really honor our value of community in all of its senses. So even for the good we're good at, but for the harder, tougher things in life as well. So be there to support, because I think if we can start being there, then we'll feel more confident knowing that there's people there. And so we might be more willing to break that silence. So I feel like it's like this catch-22,
Yeah, for sure. Lastly, middle fingers up. We always end with a moment of release or power, something funny, impactful, real, however you want to put it. What would you like to put your middle fingers up to today?
I guess the idea that vulnerability is not strength.
Mm.
So like, yeah, that would be like break that. It's like, no, that's wrong.
What we think is weakness is actually strength.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fight it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Middle fingers up. For everyone else today, like some key takeaways that Alvina's talked about is like, know your body. Ovarian cancer symptoms can be subtle, bloating, changes in appetite, fatigue, but if something feels off, it probably is. And that's a good enough reason to go and investigate further. Advocate for yourself. You're allowed to ask for more tests, second opinions, and clarity. And there are places online if you're not sure how to do that. Whatever cancer you may be experiencing, disease, illness, there are support groups out there that can help break it down and help you get the help you need. The other thing that Alvina really emphasized today was feel the feels, fear, grief, anger, even peace. All of these things can coexist at the same time. And so it's okay to take the time and space to work through those. And family does matter. Our community matters. Support doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be present, and figuring out how we can all be part of that. Is there anything else that you want to add that in the summary here that maybe I didn't in the takeaways?
No, I think you really like got all the main points of, we don't need to wait for perfect. We just need to show up for each other. And I think that's part of our values. So I think we just need to expand what that looks like to other aspects of life.
For sure, right? And I think we said this earlier today too, like there is no script for healing and no medal for silent suffering. These conversations that we're having in particular today about ovarian cancer, this is a door opener. We're just scratching the surface. We're just starting to have these kinds of conversations. If this episode stirred something in you, maybe you want to share it, you want to start the conversation, you want to check in on someone, you can also add to this conversation. You can reach out to Alvina, you know where to find her. You can reach out to us at MFU, you know where to find us. The key here is that we want to keep these conversations alive and continue them in however shape or form that we can. Middle fingers up to silence, to shame, and the fear of being real. I think at the end of the day, it's figure out what your real is, and hopefully you have people around you that support what that real is.
It's really important for me to say, like, look, you gotta trust your gut and don't silence yourself. I think breaking this whole silence idea starts with us, like learning not to silence ourselves.
Well said. Thank you so much for your time, trusting us to come on and share your story. We really appreciate that. For everyone else listening, thank you so much for being part of this conversation as well.
Thank you.